Hello there. Good morning, afternoon, and or evening, depending on when you are viewing this. For this week's video, we wanted to chat about body stigma. So as you know, at the time of recording, at least, it is January 25th, which means that for those folks who've made resolutions, we're past the 21-day mark. So some studies show that it takes 21 days to develop a habit. And going off of only my data alone, my lived experience, and then a few studies I'll talk about later, we typically tend to fall off towards the end of January about some of the resolutions we make. A lot of times, depending on the resolution that we make, that can come with a lot of feelings of shame, of feeling not good enough. Maybe for some of us, a feeling like that wasn't my goal to begin with, and maybe feeling pressured to have goals. I want to preface this by saying I am in no way against, nor is YW against having resolutions, right? Aspiring to do better, feel better in one's own skin, right? But I want to talk about the prevalence of a certain kind of resolution that has been statistically so present when it comes to the idea of a new you, new year, new you. All right. So when we think about our goals, whether it's, trying to go back to school, trying to hit the gym, trying to make sure I walk my very barky dogs, apologies in advance if and when they do bark, we always want to tap into what our why is. Am I doing it because I love these dogs? Which I do, or am I doing it because I know they might behave a little better tomorrow? Am I doing it because I feel pressured because my neighbor walks their dog 4 times a day? When it comes to a lot of the resolutions we'll be talking about today, which are typically weight loss or looking slimmer, some folks feeling stronger, your why is very personal to you. It might be that you, like me, just physically aren't very strong and you're aware of it and you want to be able to do more, right? Handle the big dogs that you might own. Alternatively, you might be picking up on, a lot of the messaging around heavier bodies that we hear, which is absolutely disproportionately negative. So when we think of New Year's resolutions, typically we hear the rhetoric of I've got to lose weight, I've got to eat healthy. Fortunately, those aren't the only resolutions, as we will see. And again, no shade, no shame to anyone who is on a weight loss journey or a healthy eating journey. That is absolutely your prerogative to live and eat and experience life as you choose. But I want us to tap into sort of the larger dialogue here, especially in the ways that it sort of promotes racism and sexism, which, as you know, with the YW, we're not about. I do want to give a little bit of insight, nerdy alert, about how long resolutions have been around. So they have been around longer than the media which promotes them, right? So as early as 4,000 years ago, ancient Babylonians would practice making resolutions as part of celebrating their new year, which incidentally occurred mid-March. Different communities have different structures of time, right? So you can think about the Mayan calendar, you can think about Jewish or Muslim calendars, and the Muslim calendar is lunar, as is the Chinese calendar. But for the ancient Babylonians, all of 4,000 years ago, over 4,000 years ago, theirs was based on the time at which they planted crops, would be sort of the start of the year, and the close of the year was when they harvested and when they weren't able to keep planting crops, right? So for them, their resolutions might have been based around that. We don't have a ton of written records about what their resolutions were for the year. Travel more, who knows? But that practice has been going around for as long as recorded history in a lot of places. Julius Caesar, the OG, he also practiced making resolutions, though his calendar year and his community's calendar year occurred in January, much like our own. For Muslims like myself, what we typically do is observe our new year according to the lunar calendar. So technically, if you compare it to the Gregorian calendar or the one that we're used to, January, February, it happens at different times of year. And it coincides with our Hajj, or our pilgrimage, where our Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, went to Mecca. And so a lot of the intentions and resolutions are around spiritual goals. A lot of the times you'll hear those are resolutions that folks in the US and across the world have. So there's an alignment of values there, because really my goal is to show that resolutions and New Year's traditions and celebrations have happened for as long as we know. A lot of them are similar, but in recent years, they've been a lot more sort of commercialized, right? Early Christians observed the tradition of reflecting on the past and striving to do better with what they considered their own mistakes to be. And then the founder of Methodism, John Wesley, in 1740, actually created a covenant renewal service, which was where you renew your covenant and your commitment to Christ. So we see a variety of different ways that resolutions have taken place. But if you take a wee moment and think about the resolutions that you've made for yourself, whether it was this year, whether it was when you were younger, whether it's what you anticipate for future years, you might notice some themes that either tie into this or don't tie into this. I will share my resolution at the start of COVID, before I knew it was COVID, was to travel more. And I'm notoriously not good with keeping my resolution. So none for me this year. Today, looking back from 4,000 years ago and then 1740 to now, about a little over a third to almost half of Americans do resolutions, right? And so you've seen memes like this one to the right here. We start the year with ambition, right? And you'll hear a lot of this in either derisive ways or sort of like community building ways for folks who do want to lose weight, of like, okay, I'll start the diet on Monday, right? So we have this, or for those of you who like me are students, like, okay, I'm going to take a break now and I'll start doing my homework at 7 o'clock. We're sort of conditioned or socialized to really like this starting things at the start of something, right? So typically folks will, you know, begin the diet or start their either faith practice or workout practice on a Monday versus like the middle of a Thursday, because we like having delineated timeframes and goals. We like measuring things. We like SMART goals. And those are all wonderful things. But again, we're going to tap into today, or whenever day you watch this, the why. And the following few slides, I apologize, I should have given a little bit of a content warning. I did mention body stigma, but we're going to, for anyone who might have struggled with or be struggling with any eating disorders or body dysmorphia, please watch with care. Feel free to skip about the presentation or to skip the presentation, right? Because what I'm discussing is deeply personal, as are all facets of identity. And again, this isn't something that I'm sharing to cause folks to not pursue their goals or to question it, but to encourage questioning your own why so that you can find that motivation if it's something you want to do. And then maybe figure out the ways in which we absorb messaging that we feel pressured to absorb, especially when it comes to how our bodies move, how our bodies look, and how our bodies are perceived by others, and then potentially in turn us. There are several studies published in the last couple of years about how children as young as 4, especially little girls as young as 4, start dieting. They're concerned about how much they're eating. And if you look into the I Weigh, I, small I, because, you know, we're at that generation, and then WEIGH by Jamila Jamil, she provides a plethora of information about how diet culture starts super, super young. This year, I'm really happy to share that the top resolution was improved mental health. We've all been through the last couple of years. We know that mental health is real. We know that therapy is a phenomenal resource if you have the privilege of attending therapy sessions. But if you notice the other 3 most popular resolutions, they're all around physicality. So improved fitness, losing weight, improving diet. Now, these can mean very specific, different things to the people who are striving to do them, right? So for me, improved diet means, you know, getting some more protein in, or, you know, eating less crisps, or maybe for you, it's just eating more and taking care of yourself, right? But with the idea of losing weight being a very prevalent diet goal, it's telling about what that means our dominant culture is telling us, right? So you'll see here, again, this is from this year, particularly different age groups have different tendencies to different goals. So we see that folks from 18 to 25, and like I wasn't able to find one about, you know, younger folks because data is typically hard to access. The biggest group for folks under 25 here is for folks who want to improve mental health. Love it. But right after it is improving fitness. And so please feel free to hit pause, check it out over here. We see that 41% over of 40-year-olds and up want to lose weight. We see just a sort of different demographic here about folks who have different aspirations. And I want you to think about this in terms of the media that these different communities might be consuming, right? So mental health and improved fitness being higher among young folks. Think about the different shows that have come out lately, right? Think about how mental health is conveyed. I'm thinking of like the Zendaya show that just came out, which shows, you know, folks struggling with addiction, struggling with mental health issues, different facets like that. What do popular celebrities look like in each demographic? For looking at previous years, we'll see that 2021, the biggest goals were exercise more, eat healthier, lose weight. Kind of similar for 2020, managing finances better was the top goal, which makes sense if you think about the year that we had in 2020. I do not encourage you thinking about it because our fifth goal is improve mental well-being. But we see eating healthier, being active, losing weight. There's just definitely this trend, and I always like to back it up with the data. So why am I talking about this? Because 79% of people who were surveyed in the US, and this is a massive study done by a great organization that does data collection and research, 79%. That is 4 out of 5, just about, people who were asked about how do you feel in your own skin, felt unhappy with how their bodies look. We're not talking about function. So I shared my goal is to, typically, and I haven't acted on it, and I know, is to be stronger. That wasn't the question that was answered here. It was, how do you look and feel in your body? And for some folks, that might be feeling too little, feeling too big, what have you, but that's a huge number of folks. The majority of folks are unhappy with how they look and how their bodies are perceived and how you fit in clothes and all of that really, really heavy stuff. And the reason it's so problematic when we sort of internalize this messaging is because the messaging is everywhere. We see everyone from royalty to strangers down the road having their pictures taken and being laughed at. If you've ever seen a news piece on the obesity epidemic, spoiler alert, it's not an epidemic. It's always these amorphous shots of heavier set bodies or close-ups of people having their lunch, and we don't know anything about their stories, but we know that we're supposed to look at folks who are heavier set, look at folks who are fat and be like, oh no, I don't want that for me. And there's, I'll share a bit of information about Aubrey Gordon, who is known as your fat friend. She's very much an advocate for just saying the word fat. It's not a bad thing. It's not a cuss word, even though folks do have different ways that we respond to it. So don't go labeling people fat without their consent, right? But it's a word that people have different relationships with, and I want to honor that. But when we're talking about fat phobia, if anyone's ever gone to the supermarket, you know that you see all of the tabloids, right? And typically it's about people's opinion. Are you too fat? Are you too thin? Selena Gomez was just roasted for looking what some folks deem too heavy on the red carpet, but it's because of a lupus flare. And like, we don't get to decide whose bodies have value. And speaking of value, we assign almost a moral value really to food. So, oh, this is guilt-free chocolate, called, like, the name of it is Sinfully Good, the guilt-free comfort book, which implies that we should be feeling guilty when we nourish our bodies in certain ways. And it's this good food, bad food, superfood. And of course we are advocates for health, but you can be healthy and heavy, and that's not the rhetoric that we're hearing. And what it does is devalue bodies, as especially women's bodies, as things to be visually consumed. And we'll hear language from folks like Piers Morgan who say, I shouldn't have to see that, referring to people's bodies. And what that does is create such deep isolation. And there's numerous studies, again, that by fat shaming folks, it's not helpful. By policing what folks eat, all that does is create feelings of isolation, depression, and if anything, would lead to more, comfort seeking through food because you're not getting it from your community. When we think about activists in this area and unintentional activists, these are the two folks who first came to mind for me. So Aubrey Gordon has a phenomenal podcast called Maintenance Phase. She has a book coming out right now and a previous book. I encourage you to look into her. She is very open about her journey as a fat woman and the hate that she receives. And this is very much her career. And then we think about Lizzo, who is a phenomenal musician who posed in the nude for her first album, I believe. And she was considered brave. And yeah, I think it's brave to do anything in the buffer to seek public attention, right? But in the same way where I'm thinking of like Kylie Minogue, who did something similar, I'm showing my age there. She wasn't considered brave for doing so. I'm thinking of Britney Spears when she performed Toxic and she had the snake draped over her and she had the tiniest bit of her stomach where abs weren't visible and she was called fat for that. And so when we see folks who are not super skinny or traditionally, the size 0 to 2 or whatever else it is we're supposed to be, right? We're having people tokenized for their bodies. So Lizzo embraces her body. She'll post videos about loving her belly and thanking her body for what it can do. And it begs the question of, is this what she sought out to do, or did she seek out to do music? And we see folks tokenized in the same way, whether it's racially, whether it's their gender, whether it's whatever other messaging that they feel assigned to them. And so think about the last time someone has said, or maybe you have said, oh, that's brave or courageous for wearing that outfit. Would you have said it to a smaller person? Right. I've heard the phrase like, oh, you're pretty for a fat girl, which is, the sort of ugly cousin to the potentially uglier phrase of you're pretty for a black girl, right? Like we have this weird value statement of the us and the them and the one of the good ones, and it gets so messy. And as I said, take care, please, while you're thinking about these things, because body stigma is deeply personal, but also super politicized. Because when it comes to how our bodies are treated, there are real socioeconomic, interpersonal, political ramifications for that. And I was thinking about this the other day in terms of what bodies are valued and not. We've never had a bald president, right? Like we assign values to different parts of our bodies that speak to so much more than it just being a physical trait. Obese workers have significantly lower starting pay than their slimmer peers. You can also find this research on Forbes. And then 45% of surveyed employers report an aversion to even recruiting, let alone hiring obese or fat or heavyset candidates. Of the 45%, or rather of the entire sample surveyed by the conversation, only 15% said that they would be likely to hire a categorized obese person. And so what this does is mean that folks who are heavier have less funding to quote unquote eat healthy. I'm reminded of Gwyneth Paltrow's food stamp challenge, where she was encouraged, or she self-nominated to see if she could live on the standard SNAP budget, and she made it 3 days. She was mocked for buying kale and avocado and like 4 or 5 limes. And I admit that I was like, okay, girl, that's not gonna work. But we sort of have this tendency to be like, well, if you're poor, just go to McDonald's, get the hamburger helper, and some of that stuff's delicious. But we sort of have this rhetoric of you don't deserve to eat well, but we're going to punish you for not eating well. And this ties into concepts such as food deserts. And then under a previous administration, the notion that fresh produce shouldn't be put in under SNAP, right, or EBT. There's also the idea, which is deeply racialized, of what is the right kind of fat. So we hear phrases like slim thick, or all the different things about liking big butts and what have you. And we have to locate this within the context of today and in the historical context, where, I apologize, I forget her name. There was a Black woman who was quite literally used in carnivals as a sideshow because of the size of her bum. There is a huge trend now for white and other non-Black communities to strive to appropriate and quite literally embody stereotypically Black traits of the fuller lips, the fuller hips, going through invasive surgeries to do so, which, when we think about the early 2000s, when heroin chic was a thing, and different models like Kate Moss, we're thinking of the Paris Hiltons of the world, where it was chic to be rather emaciated, to be really thin, to be able to see ribs. And even though these are different physical manifestations of what beauty is, there's still this judgment that seeps through of like, you don't look like this. Oh, your bum is too small, or your bum is too big. I mean, it changes on a dime, right? And not only is it culturally appropriative in really personal ways to physically change one's appearance, although again, I say this as somebody who's had essentially body modifications, right? You're allowed to do with your body what you will, but to contextualize it and then to be aware of the dangers of it. Because in 2017, 1 to 2 out of 6,000 Brazilian butt lifts resulted in death. And for those of you who don't know, a Brazilian butt lift, or a BBL, is when fat is taken from different part of your bodies and then injected into your backside. A highly dangerous, often lethal procedure that has been super duper popularized by pop culture. In 2020, and this is in the US, an estimated 1/3 people had this procedure, and it's almost expected. The culture of fillers, the culture of even filters, whether it's on your Snapchat or your Instagram, that sort of amorphizes, if that's a word, or changes what your features look like so that you can appear photoshopped, and then there's this pressure to look that way in real life, and it gets really messy and really scary. What I want us to think about, and this goes both beyond and around the concept of the new year, new you, and what body stigma is. And again, your relationship with your body is your own, and no one should be able to harm that. Anti-fat discrimination is still so real. I mentioned Aubrey Gordon here, your fat friend. She talks about how she's treated like luggage, how she'll sit down on an airplane and the person next to her will groan and then, elbow her to get out of the way. How when folks walk into, for example, a Victoria's Secret, and maybe they're of a size that is not accommodated there, they're made to feel like it's their fault that the business, in this case, Victoria's Secret, for example, does not accommodate bodies like theirs. So again, it's individualizing, putting individual blame on a person when the system's not set up for us. We all know how small airplane seats are. I don't think there's many of us who are comfortable, but instead of blaming the fact, or acknowledging, I should say, the fact that different airlines have shrunk the seats significantly in the last 30 years so that they can cram more people on there for their profit margins, we blame people who are heavier. We blame people for bringing their kids. We want to find someone to be angry at because air travel is, is stressful. The ADA Act legally protects fat Americans, but that discrimination can only be claimed if the fat person who is discriminated against can, and I quote, locate the problem on their own body. So for example, if I was discriminated against because of my race, I don't have to explain that and, give the history of what it is to be Middle Eastern / Arab. But for folks who are being discriminated against because of their weight, they have to essentially go in and haze themselves and say, it's because of my belly, it's because of my backside, what have you. And this discrimination has real significant ramifications for individuals and communities that are social, systemic, and financial in nature. And they typically they're not addressed. The start of the millennia saw a lot of rhetoric around the obesity epidemic that creates fear of growing fat, this idea of, oh God, I can't look like them because what'll that say about me, the moral value that we assign on it. And this is a real poster campaign that the Children's Healthcare of Atlanta promoted, small font, where they had a series of photos of heavy kids, and it was like, don't be like this kid. Again, it's hard to be a little girl if you're not. Imagine seeing that if you are this model, if you were someone who looks like this model, and saying that your body is something that needs to be fixed. It's coded as deviant. It's also coded as lazy, which is why we see employers not willing to hire or not being open to hiring folks who are heavier set, when really my ability to, fill out an Excel sheet has nothing to do with the size of the trousers I'm wearing, right? And it's this blame game. Instead of acknowledging things like food insecurity, acknowledging the fact that people who work multiple jobs, people who rely on public transit can't get to gyms. I tried to map out the route from my home to the nearest gym, and it would take about 35 minutes to get there. Imagine I work out for an hour and then I come back. That's over 2 hours out of my day that I would have to dedicate to something that, if you're able to drive, you can go knock out in an hour, right? And so we have to think about the larger context. And I share that example because for those of you who might be watching this, who've made a commitment to yourself to perhaps exercise more, it's hard, right? And sometimes it's hard for individual motivation, and sometimes it's hard for the systems around us that do and do not support that. And so we talk about body positivity a lot, and some would argue that that's also been co-opted by folks who aren't fat, but folks who might feel fat. And again, I can't tell you how to feel about your body, but it's a conversation that is ongoing. And so I want to close with the idea that we deserve to love our bodies and all the things they can do and the ways that we sustain them and they sustain us. But hopefully we get to a place where we can respect our bodies and respect each other's, and not jump to value-laden conclusions of seeing someone enjoy their lunch and being like, oh, should have had a salad, right? I mean, we're allowed to treat ourselves. We're allowed to treat ourselves through exercise or through snacks. And again, this is a very emotionally laden topic, which I wanted to bring up at this time of year because, again, we're at the sort of end of January when New Year's resolutions typically are harder to cling to because, again, as people, we love the start of things. We love starting things, but real life gets in the way. How many meetings have you been to before you've watched this video? How many meetings do you have to go to after this? Do you have to get dinner on the table for your kiddos, right? There's so many things that take up our time and energy and finances and just passions that oftentimes we can feel like the cards are stacked against us when it comes to things that society is telling us we need to do. Again, nothing wrong with resolutions, nothing wrong with not making resolutions, but I encourage you, and I have to encourage myself too on the days my self-esteem is really low. Like, I get to have a relationship with my body, and I don't have to absorb other people's opinions. I don't have to look at the tabloids at the supermarket, always located by the candy, by the way, where it's like, this person's too heavy, but I really do like that Kit Kat. Do you know what I mean? So we're getting these mixed messages that feel really uncomfortable. And so an alternative idea perhaps is to change the narrative around diverse bodies and body types, to acknowledge the history of how different bodies are being treated, and to acknowledge that this is a tough conversation, because anyone who's gone and seen family members who are like, oh, you're looking a bit thin, why don't you eat a hamburger? You're looking a little too heavy. It's personal. It's personal, and it's also political, and it's also societal. And these things are really, really tough. So with that, I want to thank you for taking the time to view this video. Please feel free to share with anyone you feel like might enjoy it. And with that, I thank you again for your time and hope that you have a lovely day. Again, always feel free to reach out if there's any content that you would like to see on our channel. You can reach out to me directly. My email's on our website. You can request future trainings. And I hope that you are enjoying the start to your year and that the year brings all the good stuff to you and yours. Thank you very much. When my computer lets me, I'll stop recording. Thank you.